All right, good afternoon and welcome along to the Off the Ball Six Nations show, where the plan was we were going to be coming to you every Thursday afternoon on a game week during the Six Nations. Obviously, though, with coronavirus in mind and the fears around that, the plans have kind of changed. Ireland didn't have a game last weekend against Italy, and the finale away to France this weekend has been scratched as well. But we have decided to come back in for one more reunion. We might do another one maybe in October. A couple in October, maybe. We'll see how things go. But for the final time this spring, anyway, Cian Tracey is back with me in studio. Cian, it's been a bizarre couple of weeks, to say the least.
Yeah, it has. You always kind of felt like it might go this way, just from kind of watching what was going on around the rest of Europe and the world. Yeah, it's very strange. It's very strange, obviously, from our point of view. You know, you still have to fill. I have to fill the paper. You have to still fill the airwaves. It's been unbelievably frustrating. I know. Wait
till you see how creative we're going to start getting with the content. It's going to be.
I'm looking forward to seeing it, because I'm already seeing that everyone is dipping into their contacts books, but everyone has the same kind of ideas. So it's kind of a race to get your features out there first. So, but I guess it's not really a laughing matter as such. Like, it is quite a serious thing. I know obviously the Irish players left camp on Monday. Last week, I actually met one of the players yesterday. It was a really frustrating week. They got Ulster in. They trained against them, which by all accounts was good sessions. Parts of it are supposed to be quite physical. But the players knew in the back of their heads that the chances of the France game going ahead this week were so slim as well. So I got the impression that it was sort of hard to, keep yourself fully motivated, because it was just a matter of time. They trained on Monday. They left camp then Monday evening. The players are back then in the provinces today. Like, I know the Leinster players are all back this afternoon preparing to go to South Africa. So I know we'll probably get into it, but there's lots of things up in the air at the moment that is an absolute nightmare for all the provinces now, because the focus does switch so quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to fill people in, at the time of recording, obviously we would have found out a couple of weeks ago for this weekend's 3 scheduled games. Super Saturday is what we all were calling it. It's certainly not going to be that now. So obviously, Italy against England, that was called off already a couple of weeks back. On Monday, we would have found out that the France versus Ireland game scheduled for Paris was off as well. At the time of recording, Scotland against Wales, or Wales against Scotland in Cardiff, is set to go ahead. But there is a big meeting scheduled this afternoon in the UK where they're going to kind of further reevaluate their processes and I suppose protocols on what they're doing regarding coronavirus. So that could well go as well. We're going to have to wait and see. Obviously, the knock-on then is we've had a lot of Pro 14 games getting called off, and given the announcement that was made this morning by Taoiseach Leo Varadkar about mass gatherings outdoors over 500 people, you would imagine the Pro 14 games, at least in Ireland anyway, for the time being, are going to be scratched as well. And as you said just before we came in on air as well, you would receive word that in terms of the All-Ireland League as well, which was a bit disappointing. Loads of people obviously had made the point, there's no Ireland game this weekend. Go out and support your All-Ireland League team. Get a bit more coverage for the All-Ireland League, and it would have been great. But you'd suspect as well that a lot of those games are going to be getting called off?
Yeah, I guess the attendances obviously wouldn't be massive in the IL, but if people were sort of keen to get their rugby fix this weekend, you'd imagine the attendances might be, above normal. So again, like, is it worth the risk? Probably not, I guess.
Yeah, and I think even in terms of the threshold of attendance, I think a lot of organisations now would kind of even just ignore that and might just pull the plug entirely, just to be on the safe side for the time being. Yeah,
and that's why it's pretty amazing still that, as you said, the time of recording, that the Wales-Scotland game is still going ahead. It seems like the UK have been a bit more lenient. Like, you look at Cheltenham going ahead as well, it just seems absolutely bonkers. But the game is sold out in Cardiff, 75,000 people. It'll be interesting. I think you mentioned the Pro 14. I fear that we're probably going to end up going down the route of 0-0 draws, because it's just going to be impossible to fix every single game back in. Obviously, Ulster and Leinster have Champions Cup quarter-finals coming up. You'd worry that they could be behind closed doors, because I think there's a little bit more pressure on the Champions Cup to get these games played, and in fairness, there's a bit more integrity to it because the competition has been finished. We know the standings a little bit different to what we're facing in Six Nations, but if games were to be 0-0 draws in the Pro 14, it could have seriously bad consequences for teams who are chasing for playoff spots and who are also looking for Champions Cup qualification next season. So it is really, it's the fear of the unknown, I think, is probably the best way to describe it.
You're listening and watching the Six Nations show here on OTB Sports Radio, brought to you in association with Vodafone. Team of us, everyone in. Now, we mentioned there at the start the disappointment that was in the Ireland camp following the postponement of not just the game against Italy, but the final game of the campaign against France, which was scheduled for this Saturday. Here's what Ireland head coach Andy Farrell had to say at his press conference on Monday.
Well, it is what it is, and we can't do anything but do the right thing, can we? And I suppose the reaction of the players when we've come off the back of a good morning's work was one of deflation a little bit. Gutted. We've built up for a couple of weeks on the back of a bit of disappointment, and we was looking forward to the week ahead for ourselves, and we're disappointed that it's not going ahead, but at the same time we fully understand.
The players told after they finished training this morning.
Yeah, so just a bit of a joke. We said let's just forget all that last 3 hours work. But anyway, no. Look, it's all good. It's in the bag, isn't it? The last couple of weeks, the preparation. We make sure that we harness that, and we'll catch up on the bits that we've talked about in the not too distant future.
I doubt you couldn't have foreseen this kind of a championship in your debut as head coach.
Well, it is what it is. I'm not getting too disappointed by it. There's nothing you can do. You can only control the controllables, and I plan on doing that.
Yeah, it's been a tough one for Andy Farrell so far. Obviously, getting off to those first couple of wins, the England game was a huge disappointment, and the fact that since they haven't been able to get back out and get back on the horse and kind of right any of those wrongs, they're going to have to wait realistically until the summer before they can kind of do any of that. It's been a strange opening campaign for him. There hasn't really been much that he could have done at this stage aside from the England game.
Yeah, it's hugely frustrating. It's going to be a long time for that England defeat to linger, especially the manner of it as well. I saw Johnny Sexton saying on Instagram something similar last night. In terms of what they've learned, I think it's quite difficult because that Italy game was going to be so important to see other guys, getting their chance. And you'd hope that if they took their chance, they would have started in Paris. Obviously, we don't know what Andy Farrell was thinking, but it throws obviously we don't know what's going to happen with the Australian tour. It's still a long time away yet. You'd hope by that stage that would be okay, but because of the truncated nature of what next season is going to bring, I think he's going to reevaluate what he's going to do in that tour. He kind of hinted at it on Monday that he might look at bringing maybe a few extra young players than he might have already, because when you think about it, the talk is that the refixed Six Nations games are going to go ahead at the end of October. So again, nothing has been confirmed, but the word is that the Italy game could be the weekend of the 24th of October with the France game the following weekend, which obviously leads then into three tests in November. That is an incredibly tough period. The November period is going to be incredibly tough as a standalone, but to have two Six Nations games leading into that. So you'd imagine it would be a good chance to maybe play some of these youngsters and kind of keep other lads back home with the view to what's coming down the line. So it's a mess for any head coach to deal with, but for someone who's only just barely got his feet under the table, it must be incredibly frustrating. I'm sure as I said, the parts of the session against Ulster last week were supposed to have been quite physical, but there's only so much you can do behind closed doors in a training session. Those players would have been absolutely itching to get out against Italy. They would have beaten Italy at home, let's face it. They more than likely would have gotten the bonus point, which would have set it up nicely going to Paris, which now we know if Ireland had won with a bonus point, I know it's a big if, they would have won the Six Nations. So all of a sudden then the doom and gloom of what happened in England will be lifted somewhat. So you're kind of in limbo, and I'd say for the players, if we're frustrated from the outside looking in, it must be hugely frustrating for the players themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what the IRFU and the provinces do over the next while as well, because if there is a huge number of Pro 14 games scratched, and even if on the off chance maybe the Heineken Champions Cup is closed off as well, should the IRFU and provinces use it as an opportunity to give those guys who would have been playing in the World Cup a bit of an extra rest, kind of give them a short notice, kind of a holiday, when you consider that next season you're going to be having a period where there's likely going to be like 5 tests over 6 weeks in November. That's going to be a long season to begin with, because with the way this season was, it was going to be running up till the end of June anyway, into July if you were touring internationally. It was going to be a really, really long season. So is the opportunity there to actually give players a bit of a rest now?
They might have to, because when you think about it, like last year when the IRFU and the provinces would have sat down together and kind of set out player management things, everything would have been done with the view that the World Cup was on. So like that complicates this season, and that also complicates when you play these Six Nations games, because ordinarily you'd think that they could play it in the summer before or after they go to Australia, but there's a reason they're only playing 2 tests in Australia this summer. It's because of the World Cup. So adding on a Six Nations game in and around that doesn't make a huge amount of sense, because we've seen how important player welfare has become. But I guess on the flip side of that, like let's take Leinster for example. Like I said, the players are back in today. They always knew that they were going to South Africa for a 2-week mini tour before the run into the Saracens Heineken Cup Champions Cup final, or quarter final. That was always going to be a bit of a nightmare. We saw Munster do it a couple of years ago before they played Racing, and it was a disaster for them. So that I think Leo Cullen was probably never going to bring your likes of Johnny Sexton and the frontliners. Now he has to bring the majority of them, because they desperately need game time. And from my understanding of what Leinster are thinking, a squad are going to fly out on Saturday, and then most of them are going to come back, possibly with a coach. You'd imagine if a coach does come back, it will be Stuart Lancaster, and then the younger lads are going to play the Kings in the second game, because like Leinster home and hosed in the Pro 14 already, you know. I know they're obviously chasing this like unbeaten season, but the Saracens game is what matters. And I think if the Saracens game, which you'd imagine it could fall the same way as games have now, but there's more of a chance of that being behind closed doors
as opposed to being called off.
Yeah, because there's so little room to move it. So these are all the kind of things that you've got to think about when you're talking about, you know, giving players rest and stuff. Like going into that Saracens game with players undercooked is a recipe for disaster. Now England obviously had one extra game last week, but the Saracens players are going to face similar sort of things. So it's like even you look at someone like Munster, they don't know pretty much when their next game is going to be. I was actually talking to Ian Keatley yesterday in a piece in today's Irish Independent, and like he came back to Dublin after they beat the Dragons last week, but he sent his 2-year-old daughter and his wife home 2.5 weeks ago. He's obviously living in Treviso in northern Italy, where it's on lockdown at the moment, but they're due back in training on Monday. But they're only allowed to train in groups of 6 or max 8 people. Now that includes the gym, that includes pitch sessions, and it also includes coaches. So you think how difficult that's going to be. And he's talking about, you know, teams don't want to play Benetton or Zebra at the moment.
It's like playing thirds rugby.
It's
you know, when you get a really bad turnout of trade, you got 6 or 8 people there. I will run around and play a bit of tip for the night.
Because you can't achieve anything in that, and they don't know. Like in Benetton, we're so focused on like obviously what happens in Ireland, but those guys don't know. A lot of them are playing for contracts. Like they don't know when their next game is going to be. They know the players don't want to play against them, because there is a massive sort of fear factor around there. And Ian Keatley's kind of saying like that he's due to fly back there on Sunday, and he's in Dublin now, and he's kind of going, am I crazy to be flying back into a red zone, is what he called it. Now Benetton obviously are his employers, they pay his wages, but there's a lot of things to consider here. It's kind of much more than rugby and trying to fit in games and stuff. Yeah. And he's already made the decision that his wife and child are going to stay in Dublin. Now, obviously, Ireland, you know, could end up going a similar kind of way that Italy has. We'll have to wait and see. But there's just so much more at play here than just rugby, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose to look back on the time Ireland did get during the tournament, 3 games, victory against Scotland that was scrappy enough. Very good performance against Wales, and a very disappointing performance against England. They kind of had a bit of everything across those 3 games. Yeah. So to evaluate Andy Farrell's first campaign in charge, obviously it's very difficult because it's only 3 games as opposed to 5. But what were the positives from this in terms of personnel? Obviously, it would have been, in theory, coming into it, we were all very, very excited to see a little bit more of Quaylen Doris and Max Deegan. Unfortunately, Doris, the game against Scotland, he ends up going off after 3 or 4 minutes, injured, misses out the following week, and gets back on for a nice little spell against England, kind of handled himself well. It was a difficult environment to be brought on in at the same time, but, you know, this is what we were hoping to see a little bit more, maybe in the Italy game or something, for him to get game time. other than that, we ended up kind of just the way the games fell, and because the Italy game was the one where we would have been experimenting a lot more, we probably didn't get to see that much of the new Ireland, the new players coming through.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think in terms of individuals, it is very hard to kind of pick out guys. You look at the Scotland game; they were quite lucky to win that game, but in fairness, they grounded out. They got a good win, and it was Andy Farrell's first game, so you'd be kind of inclined to give it a pass almost, because we've seen Scotland have been gamey throughout the Six Nations, and especially when they click like they did against France last week. I thought the Wales game, they were excellent, but I thought that said a lot about Wales as well. Wales were awful that day, and they haven't had a good Six Nations. But there was some impressive performances that day. I think James Ryan has been consistently good again throughout the Six Nations, but it would have been nice to see a little bit more of these sort of the younger players. But look, it hasn't happened. The England game was an absolute horror show. The end result didn't reflect at all the dominance that England enjoyed, and it was sort of systematic of maybe England at the moment, because the win over Wales last weekend, the final score didn't reflect how much better they were as well. So I think it'll be very difficult to take many learnings, to be honest. Actually, I can't believe I said that. I hate that phrase, learnings. I've been institutionalised by it.
Exactly.
I think it'd be hard, though, to take a huge amount out of it. Like 3 games, like you said, they were all so different.
Yeah.
There was no consistent flow. I don't think we didn't really see a huge change in the attacking shape. There were definitely subtle signs, but then again, like Mike Catt is only in the door as well. You weren't expecting after 3 games.
And you're probably imagining with a game plan like that as well. The logic is that you're slowly doing more and more game on game. You're slowly changing a little bit more game on game.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Like there would be concerns. Like, I know you mentioned it, I think, on the last show. Like the scrum hasn't been all that good. I think that would be a bit of a concern. Individual performances, there's been a couple of very concerning. I think Jacob Stockdale is very, very. He's just on such a bad run of form at the moment. He had a poor World Cup.
Is he someone who might actually be a little bit relieved that the Six Nations, that Ireland's games got kind of halted where they did?
But like then again, like he would have had an Italy game, and if he scores a hat-trick in that, then it kind of might have been what he needed. But like I'm worried about his form at the moment, to be honest. He's just after getting his first IRFU central contract, which, as we all know, is a huge deal, because only like pretty much 15, 16 guys in the country get them. But talk about timing, it hasn't been great timing for him, because he hasn't had a good sort of 12 months. Still good enough to bounce back, but I think that's a bit of a concern. I think it would have been interesting to see what Andy Farrell would have done in that Italy game, because it would have been ideal to play Jacob Stockdale back into form, but I think Keith Earls has been banging on the door, and I know people kind of want to keep planning for the future, but in my mind, Ireland are still a better team when Keith Earls is in it, to be honest. That's just my opinion. So there are a few concerns. I guess Andy Farrell is hoping now the likes of Stockdale goes back to Ulster, who are flying it at the moment, and kind of regains his confidence through that, with the hope of then going on the summer tour and putting this behind him. But I think it's going to be very difficult for the coaching staff to sit down and pick through this, because the games were just so different. There was no sort of flow or pattern to it. It was very hard to get your sort of teeth into it at all, because it was so disrupted.
Mm-hmm. On the flip side then, the things that you might be a little bit disappointed, is the main worry sign at the moment a lack of power, particularly as we would have seen in the game against England. Obviously, like CJ Stander and Peter Mahoney, 2 guys who came into the tournament under a lot of scrutiny, both acquitted themselves very, very well. CJ Stander was man of the match 2 out of 3 times, and you could absolutely say the effort they were putting in, they were throwing absolutely everything into it. But in terms of just kind of like dynamic carrying, things like that, it did seem Ireland were still just missing someone like that.
Yeah, like let's face it, Ireland are never going to be the most powerful team in the world, and like I presume you're talking about obviously the England game. They are incredibly powerful. Like besides the Springboks, they're probably the most powerful team in the world when they have everyone when they fit. So it is a high bar. Ireland's problem is they have to think outside the box. They have to be able to stand up to that power. They're not going to be able to overpower it. But my concern was of that England game, that they didn't seem to have any plan to counteract that power.
Yeah, is the issue a little bit though that they don't have the players to play the power game, but they're trying to a lot.
Possibly, yeah, which is a concern, because that's kind of how Ireland came unstuck last year, particularly in the World Cup and in those England games.
They're trying to back their own power, but on a lot of occasions they just don't have it. Like should they be better off playing to their strengths?
They should be, and I think there have been signs that they are trying to shift the ball wider to the flanks, to your likes of Stockdale, Conway and Larmer, because they need to use the kicking game more often. I mean, Ireland, it's always been a strength of Ireland's, but they've kind of moved away from that. You're right, they've kind of tried to match what other teams are doing, but that's not going to work. It will work against certain teams, because in fairness, they overpowered Wales, but to be fair to Scotland put it up to Ireland in the physical stakes as well, and were arguably more powerful in that regard. So I think someone like Caelan Darris does give you that bit of power. It's a different kind of power, because it's more of an injection in open space. We saw it for the break he made in Twickenham down the left touchline. So there are ways and means, but I think even in terms of the back row, so Josh van der Flier is an outstanding operator, but I think when you play certain teams, he's not physical enough to cope with the power. We saw it, we've seen it over the years. We saw it especially at the World Cup last year, the All Blacks. I'll never forget afterwards in the mix zone when he came in, he just looked like he'd went 12 rounds with Mike Tyson. It was insane, his face. And it was kind of systematic of what had happened in that game, but we saw it again against England with their ultra-physical back row, Curry, Underhill, and obviously Vunipola. When he's there, they just run over these lads. And I think Ireland are probably going to have a look at what they do against the powerful teams at open side, because I think against these most powerful teams, they think they can get after Ireland there. So whether that's a Peter O'Mahony sort of shifting to 7, which isn't his natural position, I think there's maybe a horses for courses selection, whereas Josh van der Flier has been the sort of outstanding number 7. Now, Dan Levy, if he's fit, is the obvious choice, because the last few months again have showed how much Ireland have missed him. I know there's kind of no point in focusing on players that haven't been, but you think back to 2018, Dan Levy was an absolute key cog.
And the balance in that back row at the time just seemed absolutely nailed on. It just, every game it seemed to be each person was fulfilling this specific role, and they were doing it absolutely perfectly. The balance across the board in that back row was just spot on. Yeah, and
thankfully all the sounds and signs are that he's actually nearing a return to a comeback, so you never know, maybe he could go on the Australian tour. But I know a theme of the Six Nations has been, I think it was Brian O'Driscoll who said it first, do Ireland lack a bit of dog? Dan Levy's got plenty of that, and I think he makes a huge difference. So when he comes back into that back row, I think you're right, he gives it a better balance, but you got to deal with the hand that you're dealt with now, and Ireland don't have him at the moment, so they've got to sort of think outside the box, I think.
Moving across other teams then, if we're looking at tournament contenders at the moment, so whenever this gets finished, it's looking like England, France, Ireland are the 3. To look at England for the time being, I think ever since the France game in the opening round in Paris, when it looked like they absolutely just did get caught in the hop, they didn't start and they really, really struggled. They have picked themselves back up excellently since then, grounded out against Scotland in a game in those conditions where it was just all about a win. Doesn't matter how you do it. And against Ireland and against Wales, they've just absolutely beaten those two sides up. The concern, though, would probably be that they had both games pretty much wrapped up by half-time and didn't get the bonus point.
Yeah, and I think back to the game against Twickenham, did you notice Eddie Jones coming down from the stands with about, I think it was 12 minutes left? He came down onto the touchline. I don't know if you noticed that on TV. It was a real show of arrogance, because you know that he came out with this comment that if it was a cricket game, it would have been declared. And he made a point of coming down, and he shook all... a lot of the subs had been on at that stage, so it was guys who had started, shook all their hands, and it was a real arrogant, classic Eddie Jones.
Power play.
But and you look at how Ireland finished the game, and you're kind of wondering, is it any wonder that England took their eye off the ball when their head coach is kind of doing this? I think you're right. That is a massive concern, because they were by far the better team against Ireland. They were far better than Wales as well, and I think
that was not a 3-point game.
No, it wasn't at all. Even still, though, you were kind of thinking if there was one more play left, it would have been incredible just to watch that at the end. But would be a worry for them, and you'd wonder if it's kind of sort of filtering down from Eddie Jones. It's a real pity that France game wasn't kind of more into the competition, isn't it, in Paris, because England were a bit off it that day, and you can imagine if they were playing as well as they are now against that French team, it would have been a cracker. But you mentioned the power, and like I said earlier, the Springboks in England are the 2 most powerful teams in the world right now, but there was a lot of guile and really intricate play that they mixed with that as well. You saw the couple of the tries that they scored against Wales last weekend, just so clinical. I think the forward Farrell axis has looked I keep kind of thinking they should be playing Farrell just at 10, and then you see what they can do when the pack sets the platform. It works so well, and I think George Ford has actually been one of England's most consistent players over the last while. Someone who probably doesn't get a lot of the coverage.
Yeah, and as well, like there was a lot of, even after the World Cup, it was working in bits and pieces during the Six Nations during the World Cup final. I think, didn't Eddie Jones come out afterwards and say, do you know what, I probably shouldn't have gone with the two guys, maybe just have one of those first receivers and play like a classic centre partnership. But in fairness to him, he stuck with his guns for the tournament, and it looks like they're getting much more comfortable playing that way.
Yeah, it all comes down to winning the battle up front, and I know that's a real cliche, but it really is.
Yeah, and it's exactly what they didn't do against the Springboks in the World Cup final.
Yeah, and that's why they struggled, and that's, like I said, when they get that front foot ball, the two of them work so well. I know they go way back, they're really good friends, but they have such an intuitive understanding that they switch in between first receiver all the time, which is something that Ireland are glaringly lacking at the moment. I think that's why they're coming unstuck a lot, because they don't have, everything goes through Johnny Sexton. They're trying to get Gary Ringrose and Jordan Larmour to step in and do a bit more. Bundyaki is never really going to be that type of player. And you look at how well England do it, that's something that Ireland need to look at. But yeah, I've been impressed with England. I was a bit kind of surprised, like everyone was, of Tom Curry at number 8, but he's been insanely good. You'd wonder if he's going to end up playing there long term. Probably not with Billy Vunipola, but they just have so many incredibly powerful athletes, don't they? You just look at it, Tojic, Underhill.
I know what you're saying, like Tom Curry's done absolutely fine at number 8. Like there hasn't been a glaring weakness in it whatsoever. But I actually still kind of think that if you were to play him and Underhill at 6 and 7 and have like a classic number 8 in there, it would actually be better still.
Yeah.
You know, like there isn't anything wrong with playing Curry at number 8. And, you know, Laws playing on the flank. Obviously, the power is, you know, you essentially have 3 second rows out on the pitch if Courtney Laws is playing as a back row. But I do still think you could have an even better setup if you were to have Underhill, Curry and a classic number 8.
I agree, guys. I was writing pretty much the same thing as you're saying there around when Ireland were playing them. But you look at, like, even last week, Mark Wilson came into the team who much more experience at number 8. But it's just Eddie Jones' stubborn streak, I think, personally. That was very interesting. Curry obviously plays for Sale Sharks, and Steve Diamond was asked about it a few weeks ago about what he thought of him playing number 8, and he said, like, Eddie Jones had never consulted him about it. Now he doesn't have to, obviously, but that the second Curry comes back to Sale, he will not be playing number 8. He said, what do I know? I'm only working with him day in, day out for the last few years. So I think it's a bit of a stubborn streak, but by and large it has paid off. But I agree, if you're playing a more natural number 8, you saw how well it worked at the World Cup. Let's be fair, when Billy Vunipola is there, and that Curry Underhill axis works so well. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but by all accounts he won't be playing number 8 for Sale anytime soon. Yeah,
I think the one glaring thing with England as well that's jumping out probably since the start of last year's Six Nations is if they start well, they have you. But if you can handle them for the first 20-25 minutes, I would say in the last maybe year or so, it's pretty much just been that Scotland game at Murrayfield this year, which was a complete anomaly because of the conditions.
The France game.
No, but I said that's the only time I can really remember them winning over the last the last year, 18 months without starting brilliantly. Yeah. Because the game against France, they just didn't show up, and they left themselves with too much to chase. But against Italy, blitzed Ireland right at the start and were able to ride that lead and control it. Same against Wales as well the last time round. And you look to the Six Nations last year as well. It was the exact same thing. The France game at Twickenham absolutely blitzed France. When they came to Ireland at the Aviva Stadium in the opening round, that's when they really hit Ireland. Those kicks in behind and, you know, targeting Robbie Henshaw at full back. They've done it so much. World Cup semi-final against New Zealand, they came out like 100 miles an hour. They do have this thing where they clearly target those first 10 minutes to put scores on the board. But if you can handle them for that little period, they can get frustrated.
Yeah, but it's easier said than done, isn't it, to handle it? Because, and I think it's one of those things where you get a greater appreciation when you're at the games and you see the physicality that they're bringing when they come.
The relentless speed of it.
I'd love to know what's said in the dressing room just before they go out, because they're obviously like incredibly fired up just before they go out. But you're right, they've almost trademarked that good start. But living with it is just another thing. Like, and that's one of the most frustrating thing about Ireland, because, like you said, they did it to Ireland twice last year. So everyone knew they were going to do it again. but it's kind of one thing knowing it and another thing being able to stop it. And Ireland did not look like being able to stop it at all in Twickenham this year, which is a concern. But yeah, you're right, once they get that start, they're very, very tough to beat. And you know, they've obviously got Italy to play in Rome whenever they get the chance to play that. And obviously you'd imagine Ireland will already have played Italy, so they'll sort of know in terms of if it does come down to points difference, what they need to do, which is a crucial factor in all of this.
And finally then on England as well, obviously the fallout from the game against Wales at the weekend, the two big incidents. First of all, Manu Tuolangi's red card, and I think for a lot of people as well, Eddie Jones' reaction to it, and the Joe Marler incident. So Joe Marler will be appearing before a disciplinary committee today in Dublin for grabbing the testicles of Alan Wynne Jones. Now, I kind of have a small bit of a theory on this that I might put to you, that we've seen over the last couple of years, the England players, they're constantly pushing it in terms of how far they can try antagonise teams. You can hear it if you have like the ref mic on when you're listening to when you're at an England game, like they're hooping and hollering every time they're making a big tackle. They're really getting in players' faces.
Saracens do it as well.
Saracens do it as well. There's a big thing in terms of just trying to wind people up, and for the most part, the shouting and the tackle and stuff like that, I don't really have an issue with that whatsoever, because I think it actually is just a nice mind game to be playing. But they do seem to have a habit of just trying to push that boat out a little bit further and further and further to see what they can get away with in terms of winding people up. We would have seen it at Twickenham with Maro Itoje and Owen Farrell trying to hold down players and things like that. I think this is a case, the Joe Marler incident and Alan Wynne Jones, where they have just pushed it out that little bit too far, and eventually they've gone over that line completely. And I think in large parts it is down to the way Eddie Jones is in public, the way he speaks, the way he kind of like courts the attention, tries to play the court jester, tries to, wind people up. I think it is just ultimately the process of trying to annoy people a little bit more and more and more until the point where you do actually cross the line.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think most people would agree with you as well. When your head coach is coming out and saying mad stuff, that's obviously going to filter down. But I was kind of thinking, if you're trying to wind your opposition up, you're obviously winding yourself up as well, because you're sort of conscious of doing it. And you're right, every time England players, Saracens play, you can hear it on the ref mic, you can hear them at scrum time as well. It's just little things, but it's seeping into rugby more and more. This sort of sledging is what they call it. Like we see it in the GA a good bit, obviously bits and pieces in football as well, but it's coming into rugby. It's
big time coming into rugby, I've found, in terms of scrums and kind of penalties of the breakdown, where you've guys getting back up and they're giving each other little sarcastic pats on the head, and kind of, it's just clearly trying to wind people up and get a reaction, and it's just poor sportsmanship. And eventually it gets to the point where, like last week with Joe Marler, just completely crosses the line. Yeah,
because rugby, let's call it a spade, loves to hold itself to high moral values.
Yeah, the core values.
Yeah. Come on, the core values are...
The core values were passed by a long time ago.
Yeah. But England play to the edge. It's not just the goading and stuff that they do. I was incredibly surprised by... Well, not surprised, to be honest, because the offside line just does not get refereed, in my opinion, properly in professional rugby. It's like they've forgotten to do it, and England play right on the edge of that. There's a reason why they're able to make so many dominant tackles. You saw it last week, was it 33-8, I think was the... And I know this is a new, real in vogue stat, but it does tell you a real picture of how the game has gone. But there's a reason why they're able to make lots of those dominant tackles, is because, in my opinion, lots of times they're offside in the first place. And, World Rugby are trying to clamp down on, the sort of injuries and things like that, obviously. And I think a lot of it would come from if the offside line was policed better. And I think touch judges could help out referees a lot. We saw it a lot with England last week. They played right on the edge. And the same then for the Tuilagi tackle, which was just insane. And Eddie Jones to come out then, and I know a lot has been said that the fact it was George North, who's obviously had a lot of concussions, but it doesn't matter who that player was. It was an insane tackle. Tuilagi knew straight away. He went straight over and apologised as he was walking off the pitch. And then for Eddie Jones to kind of hammer down at that point was ludicrous, really. And then I think it was Ben Youngs came out and said that if I was George North, I'd want to be protected like that. And let's remember that Ben Youngs obviously is one of the most experienced England players, but also plays with Tuilagi at Leicester.
Yeah, and I'm almost certain as well, Ben Youngs came out after the game and said it was explained to us I don't have an issue with the red card.
Yeah.
Even said Manu Tuolangi doesn't have an issue with the red card because it was explained to them. But you have someone like Eddie Jones coming out after the game saying, oh, you're not able to tackle anymore. What's a guy going to be able to do? And when World Rugby have absolutely hammered the high tackle framework and the way this is going to be refereed for the guts of 2 years now, it has been made abundantly clear how this is going to be treated, how it's going to be refereed and how it's going to be looked at. For an international head coach to still be coming out after these decisions and to be complaining about, say, how's a player going to tackle, this is never a red card, it's rugby, mate, this sort of stuff. Like,
the game's gone soft crowd, isn't it?
Yeah, you're never actually going to be able to get to a point where the high tackles are taken out of the game if you have coaches like that constantly coming out trying to belittle the process.
And then even he went one step further, to be fair, and said we were playing against 16 men at the end. Like, that's taking the game into disrepute. Like, you'd hope that he's going to get some sort of punishment, because it's the most frustrating thing about Eddie Jones. And I know when we were on a few weeks ago with Chris Jones from BBC, we were sort of saying he was real quiet, but there's definitely a sort of a fine balance, isn't there, between coming out with saying silly stuff and actually kind of stoking the fires in kind of a fun way. But he's such a brilliant coach, clearly, but this sort of stuff is just so hard to stomach, and it does take away a little bit from him. But I think you're right, it does filter down to his players. If your head coach is coming out with stuff like that, you're naturally going to do silly stuff as well, because you feel like, number one, you'll get away with it in terms of the coaching. Like, Eddie Jones isn't going to get out to you.
He's going to back you after us.
He probably thought Joe Marler, fair play, that's great. You try to wind Alwyn Jones up, which is not what anyone wants to see. But yeah, rugby probably needs to be careful, because it is kind of going that way. And if it is going to hold itself to these values, then something needs to change. Yeah,
just on the note of aggression there, we've one more video we're going to play. This is Keith Wood speaking during the week on Off the Ball, speaking about the kind of evolution of aggression in the game and how it has to be controlled.
The coaches have to respond to the laws. It's a really, really tough physical game.
Sure,
it's tough. No, there's no way this is getting any easier. It's not easier than my day. It's differently tough and in totally different ways. But the game is tough enough. You have to follow the laws of it. He's not following the laws if he thinks that isn't a penalty and if that isn't a red card. Of course it is. And I agree with you. I think it's amazing, because that game was an extraordinary game of rugby. It really, really was. So 99% of that game was just unbelievably hard to watch. It was so physical, and yet it was pretty amazing for the effort. It was amazing how Wales came back at the end, even with the accounting for the red card and the yellow card. But it'll be remembered for those sort of things, as you said. So, look, it's a game that's in a bit of trouble because of how physical it is. We have to remember, it isn't just for the international game. It's also for all the kids to come and watch that game and want to play that way next week or the week after. So what actually happens on the field on the Saturday often gets replicated. So there is that duty as well. It isn't just to the England jersey or the international jersey.
Now, Manu Tuolangi's red card wasn't the only red card of the weekend just gone, even with the two games. So Scotland and France. Scotland did everyone a favour. Got rid of France's Grand Slam and, brought Ireland right back into it if and when these games do take place. But one of the talking points coming from it was the red card for Mohamed Hawaz for the pretty blatant punch on Jamie Ritchie, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, is the punch on Jamie Ritchie, and was given a red card and has since been suspended. I'm right in saying 6 weeks reduced down to 3. The mitigating factor for why his 3-week suspension had been, or for why 3 weeks was taken off the suspension, a 50% reduction, was his inexperience at test level. So he wasn't to know that you're not able to do this in Test rugby. You can't just punch someone in the face.
It's absolutely bizarre. World Rugby, this is when they're handing out the punishments, they let themselves down a lot, don't they?
It seems like they're going out of their way now to try and knock weeks and knock percentages off suspensions.
Yeah, and it's the most frustrating thing is it's just another sort of stick to beat rugby with for people who don't like it when they come out and see these ludicrous things. But on a wider point, how frustrating is it that we've just spent a good few minutes talking about Tuolagi's red card, and you're talking about another red card now, when there were 2 cracking games last weekend, and we were so, like, I was delighted to have, like, rugby to be able to watch, but they were sort of overshadowed by 2 insane incidents. But like Mohammed Hawes, good pronunciation, better than me. Like, his backstory is very interesting. I think it was the Mail on Sunday a few weeks ago had a good interview with Mohamed Altrad, who's the Montpellier owner, and yeah, he basically had like a troubled sort of, you know,
he pretty much took his kid off the streets.
Yeah, and made an agreement with the French police that we would do everything we can to basically keep him off the streets. But
he's known for his temper, as he is very much known.
Clearly,
There was an incident, I remember reading in that piece, there was an incident with a Montpellier teammate. I can't remember which one it was, and I was mentioning in the piece, but he got in trouble basically last year at one point in a warm-up before a game.
Yeah.
Threw a punch at one of his own teammates.
Like, if you are going to get a 3-week ban and a half from 6 weeks, you know, for a punch, you may as well throw a punch. And my God, he throw a punch. It was a proper haymaker. And I presume everyone has seen that class photo. I think it was Getty.
Yeah, Dave Rogers from Getty, I think, was the guy.
That would be one of the sports photos of the year. Yeah, you talk about timing, and there's an absolute art in that. Let's be fair, not the punch, but the photo. But yeah, he badly let his team down. Yeah. I presume Montpellier in France, like, probably know they're dealing with a ticking time bomb here, but you look at someone like Kyle Sinclair, was a bit mad over the last couple of years, and he sort of eased that out of his game, which is a bit ironic because Eddie Jones can probably take a bit of credit for that. But yeah, he left his team down badly. Scotland were full value for their win, though. I was really impressed. Like, for the first few games, they just didn't show enough of an attacking spark, while they were quite good defensively. I think Steve Tandy's done a really good job. Like, someone who, you know, kind of flew under the radar, came in from, he was with the Ospreys previously, you know, didn't have much success there. But
do the last few weeks, and does that bit of hindsight actually, when you kind of apply it to the opening game, the Ireland against Scotland game, we were talking about, Ireland really struggling to break down this Scotland team. When we've seen how well they've gone on and defended in the game since, does it actually reflect a little bit better on Ireland?
Possibly, yeah. And like you take into account that it was Andy Farrell's first game. It wasn't Gregor Townsend's first game, because Gregor Townsend came into this Six Nations under huge pressure, and then you add in the Finn Russell drama as well. But yeah, I was impressed with them, and you know, they have every chance going to Cardiff this weekend if they can sort of get the balance right, because I think even they were looking good against 15 men with France anyway. It was another game that France, we talked about it throughout Six Nations, you know, you sort of didn't want to go all in on them yet, but they were looking good. But that was just sort of classic France. You think back to the World Cup quarter-final, Sebastian Vermahina getting sent off for that ridiculous elbow. It was very similar, wasn't it? And you sort of thought that Sean Edwards coming in, that they'd turned a corner a little bit, but it was kind of the same old France, unfortunately.
Was as much as the red card was completely justified, were Scotland quite lucky that it was 15-14 as opposed to 14-14 for 10 minutes at least, given the way Jamie Ritchie ran in from 15-20 yards?
Got a good shove as well on, I think was it the hooker? Probably, yeah. Like, that's
like he was the man that started. Yeah, he was the man who started the schmozzle that saw him getting punched in the face.
Yeah, it's probably another thing that rugby needs to look at, because that wouldn't have probably kicked off if he hadn't, because he came from a long way. You're right, and got a good proper shove.
I'm still saying give Mohamed Hawes his red card all day long. I think a lot of people would say that Jamie Ritchie probably deserved to at least see 10 minutes in the bench just for starting the whole thing.
I'd agree. Definitely deserved a red card, but in my opinion deserved more than a 3-week ban as well. Like, because it's incredible to think that you can punch someone in the face like that, and like, not to be overly dramatic, but like one punch can do serious damage to someone, and he caught him flush in the face there. You don't know how he's going to fall or anything, and to get 3 weeks for that. And I don't want to say like, if you did that on the street or in the workplace, because I don't quite buy into those comparisons, because like, just a lot of stuff what goes on a sports field is just very different. But 3 weeks is far too lenient in my opinion for something like that.
We have a few awards to run through before we wrap up, but just one other point on the tournament as a whole is the back row now becoming the back row becoming the glamour position of rugby. 9 of the 10 matches that were played in the tournament, 9 of them were man of the match going to a back row forward.
Great stat. That's a great
9
stat.
of the 10.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
More so than out half these days.
It's probably a sign of the way the game is being played, though, as well. I mean, like, we've just spent a lot of time talking about how physical teams have become. Like, that's down to what's happening at the breakdown and things like that. So it's probably a trend of the way rugby's going. We would all, I would still prefer to see an out half getting man of the match, because it more than likely means there's been more running rugby in it. But yeah, that's a really interesting stat. But there's a lot of outstanding back row players in this current Six Nations. So you look at like what France have done. I was really impressed with the Scottish back row last week as well. So maybe it's just sort of, there's a lot of it's outstanding back row players around at the moment that's feeding into that trend.
We are running out of time, so very quickly we're going to run through our Six Nations awards.
Mid-tournament awards.
Midterm awards. So player of the tournament, you lead off.
I went for Maro Itoje, purely because you talk about the aggression that England are bringing, and when they're playing right on the edge, I think it's Itoje it's the guy who's setting that a lot of the time. Yeah,
I would have probably have gone ahead and said Maro Itoje as well, but I give you the honour of nominating your guys first. So in the end, I went for Charles Olivon, France. He actually probably would have been a contender as well for comeback player of the tournament, which we've done. Someone who had kind of got a few caps a few years ago. Granted, he came back in for the World Cup. All of a sudden, he was captain this time round.
He's been brilliant.
And he was absolutely brilliant. Yeah. 4 tries across his 4 games as well. I just thought he was absolutely magnificent. Try of the tournament, I went for Justin Tipperick against England at the weekend. Straight from the kick-off, just lovely hands, in, out. Just kind of sucking a defender, pass the ball in under the post. It was just perfect.
Yeah, it was absolutely class. I had a feeling you were going to go that way. I picked something a little bit different. I went for Anthony Watson's try last week, just because I'm a sucker for a good set-piece move. There was just so many intricate parts to that. Curry's little sort of block and the Welsh defence. It was great to see Anthony Watson back, like such a quality player. But when you see a move pay off that's clearly been worked on, there's just something brilliant about that.
Comeback player?
I went for Hamish Watson. I was at the World Cup game in Japan when he got that horrific injury against Ireland, and I don't know how he wasn't man of the match last week. I know Jamie Ritchie played well, but for me, Hamish Watson was outstanding, and he's a serious player. He looks like he could make a Lions tour next year, I think. Yeah,
and another Scottish player who I think has a great shot of being on the Lions tour next year as well is who I've gone for comeback player of the year of the tournament, and that's Rory Sutherland.
Got to get your prop in there.
Loose head prop. In fact, I thought it was absolutely fantastic.
He was.
Opening game of the tournament, he'd looked decent enough against Ireland, and I was like, I want to keep an eye on him. And he's been absolutely brilliant since, and he started every game for Scotland so far as well. And for someone who, I think it was like 2-3 years ago, picked up a couple of caps over the course of maybe 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden he's just 2020 starts, he's back in, starting at loosehead, and he was absolutely brilliant. And then our last award, newcomer of the tournament.
Yeah, I went for Anthony Bouthier, the France fullback. I mean, at the start of the tournament, I was surprised they moved away from Thomas Ramos, but I didn't know a huge amount about Bouthier, to be honest. But I think he's been excellent. He's provided us with one of the moments of the Six Nations with that kick against England in the first game. But he covers the backfield really well, and I think France looked like now they have a fullback who they can kind of build towards the future. Yeah, and for my nomination then for newcomer, I've gone for someone who had a very, very tough day against Ireland, Nick Tompkins. But I think he kind of gave us a bit of everything. Defensively, there are issues there that he needs to work on. But I think almost anything Wales have done good in terms of attack, he's almost been at the centre of it across their 4 games so far. Big boots to fill in Jonathan Davies as well. Huge boots to fill. But I thought against England there were definitely issues defensively. But any good thing in attack came directly from him, from Nick Tompkins. So, Cian Treacy, thanks a million for joining us over these 4 episodes. We should have another couple later on in the year. Back in October for a Six Nations show. Could be interesting. Long enough midterm break, but thanks for joining us. Thanks, Neil. Thanks very much. And that's it for the Six Nations show here on Off the Ball for maybe a few months at least. Hopefully we'll be back when Ireland get to complete their Six Nations campaign. But from us here on Off the Ball, thanks for watching, and goodbye.